Hello. Today I chat with Jean M. Russell, and wow, Jean has this amazing stance towards participatory and cooperative ways of being that is incredibly helpful to listen to. And she's been doing it for, like decades, and just knows all of these little memetic turns of phrase to say, hey, you're thinking from this competition way, let's instead think from this collaborative way. Or you're thinking from this winner take all, but instead we can think of a participatory way. And so if you're interested in open source software or better social ecosystem design, I think there's a lot of juicy stuff in this conversation. So I hope you enjoy it, and goodbye. Hello, fellow pluralists. I'm Rhys, the co-founder of Roote, and welcome to The Rhys Show. This century is a turning point in human history, and I'm here to help you navigate it. I hope that you come away with a new understanding of the scientific, technological, and societal trends that are poised to radically reshape our world, and how you can work with those trends to become a live player in building a solar punk future. And to chat about that, I'm excited to chat today with Jean M. Russell. Jean is this really kind of curious, exciting social ecosystem designer, culture hacker, and facilitator that has been exploring this concept of thrivability for a while now, since 2007, writing a book on it, creating an online community, those kinds of things. So excited to have you on the show today, Jean, and welcome.
Thank you for having me. Delighted to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to dive in. And I think Jean is, she's just a person who's been exploring this kind of there's some folks who explore techno-utopian futures and Jean is exploring still futures, but kind of connected more to the earth and connected more to how we as a whole ecosystem can thrive and stuff like that. And so I guess with that in mind, Jean, could you explain both for me and the listeners, what is thrivability?
Of course, I get asked this all the time.
Yeah.
And I prefer to be asked it live because everybody knows what it is themselves. And so I'd rather ask you, when I say thrivability, the ability to thrive, what comes alive in you?
That's a good question. I think what comes alive in me, for me personally, it is to have maybe both the safety, but also the autonomy to explore the things that I'm curious about and the connections that I want in the world. And then maybe for the whole ecosystem, I guess thrivability means for a kind of meta stable existence, long-term existence that makes everybody as happy as possible. Everybody and all beings and all that.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I love that. I cringe a little bit at the happy.
Yeah.
I wrote this blog post a long time ago where I was like, if you want to be happy, come visit me, give me most of your stuff. I'll beat you for a couple of days. And then when I set you free and give you some of your stuff back, you will have an experience of happiness. It's so fleeting. But satisfaction maybe comes a little bit closer to the feeling of feeling congruent in yourself and satisfied, enriched by the experiences that you're having. Yeah. And I also like that you pointed out to multiple levels in the ecosystem, right? It's not just you getting your glory. It's also, what does that mean for your family, your community, the extended community, the ecosystem, the planet? All of those things are interacting at various layers. And so thrivability, it lies in the life that comes out of the collective as much as it is in the individual.
And tell me more about the happiness versus satisfaction piece, because I think for humans it makes sense for okay, I do want to live a life of clarity and satisfaction, not necessarily happy, just pure happy. But is there something about? But I think when I think about from a earth perspective or the cows or whatever, it's easier for me to point at a cow and be like, that's a happier cow because it's not in factory farms. But it's tough for me to be that cow seems like it had a satisfying existence, it lived a life of satisfaction. So how would you give a positive valence term for what animals should experience or what Gaia should experience?
Right. That's an excellent question. So my criticism of happiness comes out of Daniel Goleman's work, who defines, happy as more of a a short-term delighted state that we easily habituate to, where joy, awe, wonder, we know that they're not long-term. And so we're okay. Like we expect them to be short-term. And so is our cow delighted that he found a fresh patch of clover, or that he didn't get stuck with a cattle prod or run through one of those cattle chutes? You know, like, and I don't know about the inner life of the cow, but we can see the health indicators of like, oh, the fur is doing well, the cow is thriving, right? Whether it's the blood pressure or the length of life or the quality of its fingernails or, you know, its hooves or whatever, right? Like we can look for all these indicators of good health.
Yeah, and so I guess there's like, you can like look backwards and be like, okay, the cow's doing okay. And the thing that you said with like the Daniel Goldman or something, I'm not sure if I've heard of that yet, but it's like, it's this idea of like happiness is like these short-term like dopamine hits versus like either delight or purpose or meaning, which are kind of like tell me more about that distinction.
Yeah. So he was one of the people that switched psychology from the negative aspects, here's what disease looks like, to what does the positive aspects look
He's
like?
the positive psychology guy. Yeah. Maybe.
Yes.
Okay, great.
And so he does make a distinction between some subtypes of happiness. So there's the hedonic, you know, I had a delicious chocolate dessert, I'm having a ton of joy, but after 3 bites, you've habituated to how yummy it is. And so the hedonic is hard to stay satisfied in. And then there's flow states. Of course, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's work around flow states, right? Where you don't know that you're happy because any self-awareness kind of takes you out of the flow state. But you can look back and go, oh, I was in a state of joy because I was in flow. And then purpose-driven, which may not make you look very happy at all. You might have a very serious expression on your face, be very on purpose, but you get a form of satisfaction out of being on purpose. And so that one doesn't habituate. The thing to be very careful for with the dopamine ones is the habituation. And then what can you do to be an antidote to the habituation that we slip into?
Wow. Got it. That makes sense. I like each of those. It's the just the hedonic habituation versus the flow state where you're just jamming versus the long-term purpose and the feeling of satisfaction. I think that's just a helpful thing for as folks moved and as I move through my own life. It's like, okay, which things am I in, just to be hyper aware of obviously all the addictive kind of hedonic ones in the hedonic treadmill versus searching for the ones that like, feel more long-term aligned or whatever. So tell me more about this, like, so thrivability and like, and so it's this, you know, I guess so correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you don't necessarily like, is there, and I was searching for this a little bit before the show. I was like, is there like an Uber, is there like a definition of it? Or do you think it's more of like an emergent thing that we kind of chat about with others and like, and then we move towards those like emergent, slightly positive futures?
I'm a hugely participatory person. And that means that I don't corner the market on what does thrivability mean. I have some definitions that I can throw out and say, you know, life giving rise to more life. Some indicators like, does the life look like it's thriving? Is it crowding anything out? Is something else having to be sacrificed for it? I can ask some of those questions. But I think the real gift is that it's an inspirational word that makes you wonder, what does thrivability look like in your context? And I don't have access to that context. And so you're going to be better at knowing what thrivability is in your context and how that's going to show up. You see this, I think, a little bit with regeneration, that like when we're regenerating soil, what one soil needs is quite different than another soil in order to be fully healthy. And so I think of thrivability that way too, that if we nail down the definition too much, we're going to end up in little semantic arguments about what's included and not, and lose the spirit of, let's move beyond sustainability. Nobody wants sustainable relationships, and keeping a flat line is not what the world does. It's not what nature does. What is it to really thrive?
Yeah, I love that. I think there's, so many juicy things there. The first is, sustainability is not the goal. Thriving or something adjacent to thriving, flourishing, whatever you want to call it, is the goal. And then you just made a lot of really crucial verbal stanzas and cues there that I think are really amazing. The first is saying, hey, you say, hey, I don't know if you said participatory person or something. It's like having, I think, a participatory stance on life is really, really important, where you say, hey, and I think then you kind of countered it versus these other lenses that can be pretty negative of the like, okay, life bringing motor life is good, but what happens if it crowds out other things? You have to ask that question. And I think, and maybe this is a good time to chat about, we kind of try to have this mindset. There's this like wisdom age piece that we wrote that I think we shared with you and that you may have read.
Mm-hmm.
I think, but I think in the tough part, and that, I kind of vibed with on that for a second, is I think we kind of wanted to like point at this like more positive future that we should actually go towards. But there's this balance of like, we obviously we can't own the word wisdom, and we don't want to own the word wisdom or a wisdom age or any of that stuff. And so there was this internal dialogue within the team, which is like, should we just say we're moving towards like a positive future, or should we like actually call it something and use a more specific word? And I just think that there's something beautiful about the again, a reframe that you said. There's like the gift that you're giving is just saying the word thrivability to the person and then having them create it and co-create it in their life. And so maybe tell me a little bit more about how, like, if Roote, because Roote's trying to also be this, like, I don't know, like an org that might have for-profit and non-profit entities and blah, blah, and like actually, growing and blah. How should we as an org not have a little bit more of that kind of participatory, not crowding out, emergent, context-dependent mindset around building the wisdom age instead of like make it everybody be wiser?
Yeah. Okay, I have a sideways way of coming at my answer to you, and it's going to take me a minute. So one of the projects that I was involved in was called CI to I Global, and CI to I stands for Collective, Co-Creative Innovation and Impact Institute. No longer exists.
Co-Creative Innovation and Impact Institute.
That's right.
Great.
And also CI to I.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we were a group of female facilitators who were working in social change spaces across the world, like Africa, Asia, Australia, South America, like really across the globe. And very curious about what is co-creation and how do we co-create. And we did a little research project where we brought together a bunch of people who had successful co-creation projects. And we looked at what do we see that are patterns in these projects. And one thing that we noticed was some projects co-create who is involved. And it's kind of an open question. It's not being dictated. Who is the opening? Some said what we produce. We don't know what we're going to produce. These people are going to produce it, but we don't know what the output's going to be. And some people were like, how? We know what the how is. Or you don't know what the how is and you know who the who and the what is. But we noticed that none of the projects were unclear about one of these dimensions. And we realized that co-creation cannot happen about all these dimensions simultaneously. You have to have something to push against. So there has to be a fixed place of, we know how we're going to go about this process, or we know what we're going to do, or we know who's going to do it, or two of the three. So that's what I would say, be clear about. Be clear about what you're actually going to stand in, so that when you ask the question, that question is where people's focus is. And they're not like, well, how are we going to go about it? Or somebody else needs to be in the room.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah. So if I understand it correctly, it's like, well, hey, that's like cool. That sounds like a great group of folks who are thinking about this. And like, yeah. And so you're saying that they were, when they had this kind of opening, this like, hey, here's this participatory co-creative energy. It can't be at all three at once. And then for us to ask, okay, what are we co-creating? Or do we have this open play space around who can come in and help with stuff? Or is it an open play space around like, hey, here's like, we're just like giving out grants to like what you're building. So like go forth and like build stuff, or is it about the how, and maybe we have open source software and people can kind of, so yeah, is that, could you maybe give one other specific example of how to like break down the who, the what, and the how there?
Yeah. So I tend to be dictatorial about how. In most of my co-creative projects, I say, I am the benevolent dictator. I want to achieve this goal. I'm completely open to what content you're going to provide, but I'm going to gather ideas about Thrivability itself. And you can refer people, but it's going to be me choosing who are the people, and this is how it's going to be put together. And then I just invite people to collaborate. So that's mine. I'm the malevolent dictator. And the what is the thing that's unsure, like the content of the Thrivability sketch, the first project I did in 2010. I had 60 some people contribute in 3 months to a book that we published online. And so it was incredibly fast paced, and we could manage that because the process was very clear.
Yeah, because you owned the how, essentially. And you were like, look, I'm owning the how. Put in any, and you also, made clear about the bell and the bat signal that you were ringing about the, about kind of like the, a little bit about like the why or like the macro topic or whatever. But then you were like, okay, but the who and the what, it can be anybody who comes in here and they can write about whatever they want. But like, we're going to be writing in this form and we're going to be doing these things. And you can't give me a 20-page piece like we were co-creating it here. So it's like, so you're a little sub essay. Okay, cool. I think that's helpful.
500 words or less.
Exactly. Great. That's a really helpful frame. I guess I want to take this and go in a different direction with it too, which is, I think, an interesting thing that I've kind of osmosis from you based off of kind of just looking through some of your stuff again before this call was like, I don't know, you have this, as all osmosis happens, it happens through a tweet. And so I'm looking at this, a recent tweet of yours that said like, hey, like folks need to understand, that's not actually what you said, but the key piece that you say here are the Lord of Flies is not actually how humans work, just dark imaginings, and that cooperation is the rule. We focus on exceptions and risks. I think this is this like classic thing where folks think that evolution and evolutionary systems must be all about the struggle for survival. But in fact, they can be about the snuggle for survival or whatever. Tell me more about how you view cooperation playing a role versus competition playing a role.
Yeah. So that little tweet was coming off of reading Survival of the Friendliest, which I was, of course, reading because I already believed that friendliness was an important function. And that's a very sciencey kind of book, evolutionary biology, people showing the science on it. But the thing with the Lord of the Flies, it turns out that guy was a horrible person, the writer of that book, right? And so it's just like, oh, sometimes who the person is that says the thing is what he's going to make a claim about. And the other thing is, people miss the cooperation we're in all the time. Like, go to the grocery store and notice all the times people cooperated. Like when you switch your focus to, can I go to the grocery store, the restaurant, walk down the street, drive my car? How much cooperation am I getting from other people? People move out of the way so you don't bump into them. Somebody's like, oh, no, you go ahead. You reach for the same item, you have a lovely conversation. Like, most of our life is this flow of cooperation with people around us. And it's the exception that we're like, that's so harsh. And so much of our work is about teamwork. Like, very few people produce anything by themselves. It's always about cooperating with other people. And in my work with companies, I find that who your cooperators are matters more than your competitors. So people always list, like, here's my competitive field, but they don't do a cooperative analysis. And it's actually your cooperators who are the partners that get you your first clients, that get you access to supply chain things, right? That find your funders for you. Like, your partners and who you cooperate with ends up building the business for you. And so I think we need to keep that in mind and continuously remind ourselves to pay attention to how much cooperation is happening around us. And this is not just positive thinking kind of, oh, just think about how good it is. It's like, no, it's really happening there. And when you build on the things that are happening that are well, you get more of those things. And less.
Yeah, no, I love that. I was just going to say, I think that is an amazing, I think it makes sense of like, it's one of these classic things where we can put our focus on different things and you can kind of, if you see the world, well, so what you said about the Lord of the Flies person, like understanding who the person was and that, and being like, oh, this person, and I know nothing about them, but like, oh, they were kind of a person who's really into competition or whatever. That, and it makes me just, and then that's just become obviously a meme within our culture. And so I wonder if there's like, is there an anti-Lord? Is there like, instead of a Lord of the Flies, is there another like small memetic unit that we could use to share the other version of reality?
I don't know. It lacks drama. It just,
Mm-hmm.
I went through a phase of wanting to write this book that I was calling the Triad, because most stories are man against machine, or man against nature, or machine against nature. And I was like, what is it if these three are actually in alignment together? What if they're all growing each other? Oh, well, suddenly I feel like there's no drama. Like, there's no big conflict. It's like we're problem solvers without a problem to solve. And so I think that's part of why we find it difficult to find the stories of cooperation. But you know them when you see them. You come across little vignettes that just, they make you cry because somebody contributed. The one that was inspiring to me lately that I read was what was it called? Rebecca Solnit's Paradise Built in Hell.
Mm.
Just story after story of, here's a catastrophic experience, a hurricane, an earthquake, a war, and people helping. And it's like, oh, the elites are like, oh, it's going to be so bad. Mm-hmm. And actually in practice, people on the street are like, can I bring you a casserole with the few things that I have left in the fridge before they go bad, right? Like,
mm-hmm. Yeah, wow. It just makes me think, yeah, so much of this is like thinking about what spreads memetically, and that what you get with the COVID story, like the easier COVID story is, oh my God, there's no toilet paper. And you get some random video clip of two people like, battling over the final bit of toilet paper. When in fact, if you looked in aggregate at the amount of, not what spreads memetically, but what was happening actually in real life, you'd be like, oh, actually these people were nice and like they were helping each other and like mutual aid happened and all these things. So I think that is we just need to somehow find a way, and as a society, it just makes me think of there's a lot of finding ways as a society to kind of push back against that like memetic over indexing, I think, is one piece. I think another thing that you said I love the idea of the triad, and it makes me think those are like in man, nature, and machine. Those are, sometimes I'll call them like nature 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0. Like 1.0 is nature, 2.0 is humans, and then 3.0 is machines or whatever. And we want those things to be co-evolving in a positive way with each other, thriving in a positive way. But yeah, that's not like a fun, there's no one's gonna like, that's not a Lord of the Flies style story. So yeah, I don't know. I think I think this is an interesting, and I guess the other piece that it was making me think of a thread that I want to pull here, and I haven't actually read it much, but I was looking deeper into, I guess, like anarchism and anarcho-syndicalism and dual power stuff, and then found, Peter Kropotkin, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, and one of his original books about that, like, essentially we had like social Darwinism was a big thing that was happening at the time, where it was like, sorry, this looks like the white race is just better than the other races. Like, sorry, that's just like the evolutionary thing or whatever. And Kropotkin was like, hey, actually, there's so much mutual aid that happened. He started those ideas. So I don't know. Have you read Kropotkin? I haven't. I know nothing, very little about it.
I haven't, but the anarchists in my life have referenced it repeatedly. So I know I should be.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I guess it's and I guess the mutual aid. He wrote a book in 1902. I'm looking up here. It's like, which is really cool. And so just like finding ways to, yeah. So I guess that what you're saying, and I think, yeah. So do you think, when you imagine of reality of, I don't know, do you find other ways that we as a people can like be better at, I don't know, seeing is it primarily as the first move just to see the cooperation in our life? Or like, what are the other ways that we can kind of make a more cooperative lens of society?
Yeah. Well, remember what I said about problem solving? Like, we're problem solving creatures. And so using your wisdom to focus that problem solving brain on a problem at hand, like, where is the real problem? Because otherwise it's just going to gnaw looking for problems. And so being conscious about directing that problem solving mind towards things that you want to solve as problems allows it to. I have a saying that the ego is a dog, and you better walk your dog rather than having it walk you. And it feels that way to me too about the problem-solving brain. Like, take the problem-solving brain out, give it a problem to solve, enjoy the glee that it gives from working on a problem, but don't allow it to take over in a way that it sees problems everywhere.
I love that. I think, I mean, Yeah, I think the ego as a dog makes me think of a meditation framing, which is we have the monkey mind, and you can't make the monkey mind. It's not the way to beat the monkey mind is not to like shoot it behind the alley or whatever. It's to like say, hey, monkey mind, I want to place you on something else, and what I'm going to place you on is my breath and the physical sensations of my breath. And so you can like go to town on that, but that's where you're going to hang out right now instead of like going to town on like all the like anxieties and fears and all these things that you normally do. So yeah, I agree that it makes me think too about like finding ways to take politics, especially our current politics, and like it shouldn't be an allowed thing to have these kind of influencer debates about like gun control in America or whatever. Like that that should just be a thing that is extremely done in like policy arenas, blah blah. And like if you want to do politics, you can do some politics and you can like do weird influencer battles, but like because those still need to happen in a way, but like we can't allow it to subsume quote unquote important problems. Yeah. So okay, I think that's I think I'm getting a little bit of the cooperation. And I guess one thing I want to hit on here though, I think is really important is I think a frame that you said there that I think is important for other folks to recognize is that we want to be like, in Dawkins and the Selfish Gene talks about the genes that survive are genes that succeed in the presence of other genes that also succeed in the presence of them. And so you want these like mutually co-reinforcing genes. Those are the ones that succeed. And similarly, you want these kind of like the things that succeed in society are the partnerships, are the cooperation, are these kind of like mutually co-reinforcing things. And so I think to kind of, as you said there, instead of like pointing at the bad and pointing at all the weird competition, instead just like go doubling down on the good. Is that right? How else do you see that?
Well, I have a few little problems with evolutionary stuff, coming out of a biology background too. The first one is we are some part of the evolutionary output, and we are compassionate, emotional creatures. And so when we think about evolution, often people get dispassionate and are like, it's okay. It justifies the suffering, morally justifies the suffering because evolution. It's like, okay, but lichen, which is a really, really cool thing, exists because algae couldn't survive in that environment without fungus. And so because the environment was brutal, we developed this thing. Do we really want to keep perpetuating brutal conditions in order to drive some of these things? Because compassion is something that we have evolved to have. And so what does that enable us to build from here? Do we need to go back to fighting in the way that bacteria fight or amoeba fight when we've gotten to this place of having compassion? How do we take advantage of what humans have developed through this line? And then I really like what you said about, nature does a lot of stuff through cooperation. One of the books that I was inspired by recently talked about horizontal gene transfer. And so now it's like not even your DNA is your DNA. Like first they were like, okay, mitochondria might not really be human DNA. And now they're like, your own DNA is bacterial, right? Parts of your DNA are coming from other species, not just human species. This is an evolutionary advantage. And I think about, well, what can companies do that are like that? Like to me, things like open source is an example of horizontal gene transfer in the corporate environment. Like, let's pay to have this thing developed in the center that all of us get a benefit from, instead of just being, well, I'm going to build it on my own and keep it hidden behind closed doors. How can we do more of those things? And we've seen the benefits over the last 30, 50 years of what approaching things that way can do.
I love that. I think, yeah, I mean, both of those pieces are really juicy. I think there's just a lot. There's so many, like the metaphor of taking biological entities and then mapping them into human stuff. Sometimes it can go wrong and things, but I think often it can be extremely powerful. And so I think both of those, I think, are powerful ways on that. The first one is interesting because it's like, okay, we are, because I think, yeah, any kind of replicator genes or memes are like a response to their environment. And so when the environment says, oh, this is like, the environment's really tough, and then the algae or the lichen need to go, oh my God, like let's make the algae and the fungus combine to make a lichen. Then it's like, okay, that was a response to a brutal environment. And what I'm hearing you say is that how can we create a better environment of compassion and love and wisdom and thriving and all those things, such that the kind of institutional structures that emerge and the group coordination and the way people act is kind of, because they're in this like safe and trusted world, they can be more, they don't have to like need to like do these weird kind of intensities of cooperation or collaboration or competition. Instead, they can kind of be like loosely held by the environment. Or is that what you're talking about?
So yes, and like I'm trying to provide that there is an alternative. And as soon as there's an alternative, then we can ask the moral question. Is it morally better to create a brutal environment in which we get interesting outcomes like lichen? Mm-hmm. Or are we able to get such good outcomes from other contexts without having to be brutal? Mm-hmm. And then we can ask that in a moral way, like, oh, you're creating an artificially brutal environment of competition because you think it justifies the outcome. Here's where we've done it without having to use brutal methods. And it undermines the use of that as a moral argument, right? That it's a frustration of mine.
Yeah, I like. Well, I think that's a great. I love to like. Here's where I'm frustrated, people. That's a because what I mean. You're like, you want to like choke the random person over here that's like, hey, like, and what I'm hearing from you is like, here's this random competition person who's just like, look, like we got to have competition because like, look what we get out. We get this amazing thing on the other side of it, which is really cheap goods or whatever. And you're like, yes, but is that, do the ends justify the means? And I think showing these, I think in the yes, but I guess the specific question I have for you is there? So I guess what you're saying is this is in some ways about hitting the competition people and saying like, look, I know that you're using competition as a way to you're saying the brutal conditions are like the way through and to make the like interesting things in the world. Is there can you give me an example of like, I guess I'm still a little bit confused on like what kind of environment you would is like a less brutal environment and is instead an environment that is more positive? What does that look like for humans?
Oh, I wanted to go to the animal environment because one of the arguments I use around this evolution stuff is, how did we get snails, butterflies, and three-toed sloths? Like the three-toed sloth, like how is that the strongest thing in the environment, right? It's fit. It fits in its environment because its environment is not brutal. And so it can move quite slowly and hang around and get enough food and it's fine. Right?
Yes. Actually, I love keeping on the environmental train for a second because I was thinking like, but did we just get these like random like quote unquote lazy animals or whatever? And like sloth is the perfect example maybe, but I guess that's interesting. So yeah, sloths and butter, like I guess how do we get butterflies? How do butterflies emerge? I don't know. Do you know?
Yeah, I don't know. Well, I mean, butterflies has a painful process. It completely liquefies itself, right? Like that seems a little brutal too. But my point just being that people often, they call to nature in order to justify their behavior.
Yeah.
And when they call it, they're like, well, lions are clearly the best. And it's like, no, the wild world does not see it that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The wild world mixes it all up and needs the ecosystem to be. And so like all the new books coming out about the power of fungus, fascinating, right? Like the internet of the wild world.
Yeah. Is there a book? I was just doing kind of the only reason why I even knew what you were talking about with lichen being a combination of algae and a fungus is because I did a slight like wiki dive on fungus recently. Is there a book on, if I'm trying to understand fungus better and mycelia networks better, what's one you recommend?
Yes. Oh. It came out in the last 2 years. It's a guy who grew some mushroom on the book itself after he published it. It's fascinating. I can't remember the title right now.
Yeah, Entangled Life. We are.
Yes.
Okay, yes. Great. Okay, great. That's the one. I'll check that out. Tell me about but then when you kind of, I guess when you think, so I do think having these metaphors in our minds of like good, and I think about something maybe like the Galapagos or something, where like, oh, here's these like turtles that are big and like that seems cool, and they're like don't have that many predators, and so I think that there's like a similar thing, trying to have those examples in our mind seems powerful, and I guess in the human world, is it like, I guess like the counter argument to this might be something where it's like, hey, we live in this world where we have like many folks in America have like abundance and things in the Western world, and then so they don't have to like, so there's like less competition in various ways, and then what that means is like our tendency towards gluttony and addiction and things like that. And so I don't know, I'm kind of struggling to think of like what kind of environment would you imagine if you imagine a positive environment, what does that look like for humans? Yeah, like a positive environment that then when institutions try to compete with each other, or when they're like competing, or they're not trying to compete but they're collaborating, that the environmental structure that like we have superstructure that we've created is a positive one. So things that emerge are like are more like three-legged sloths or three-toed sloths.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry to throw this wrench in, but I don't know that it's the structure. What I do know, there was a phase that I went through of studying social network analysis. And so I was having these conversations with this amazing person, Valdis Krebs, who was a social network analysis early person. And we were talking about the development of Twitter and how exciting it was, and the change about follower count and followers and how that was shaping the environment. And what I was understanding from him and from reading a bunch of game design is that you have to keep designing these systems to be just a little bit more complex than the thing that they're trying to cover. And so anytime you start designing the structure or the whatever, you're going to have some kind of response to it, and it's going to keep pushing back and evolving. And so it just needs to be slightly better. And then I'm going to go over here and go remember the habituation stuff, right? As soon as you now have that new ice maker in your refrigerator, you habituate to the ice maker in the refrigerator. And now you can't imagine not having an ice maker in your refrigerator. And so I think that we have to continually stimulate ourselves to be changing the forms and exploring the variety, rather than trying to get stuck on, well, this particular structure is going to work, because humans will break it as soon as they get there. And they'll be like, the flaw in this one is...
Yes, totally. Yeah, and I agree with that. There's like a pseudo, one could call it an arms race. That would be the like maybe competition framing on. You could also call it a co-evolutionary feedback loop or whatever. Yeah, that's interesting. I think, yeah, and I guess, yeah, I cool. That makes, and I guess maybe one other bonus thing I'd say to you on this is, I think the or just curious for your thoughts on this is, I think one of the, I'm writing this book right now on what information wants, and a crucial part of that book is, well, hey, I'm excited to send it to you because you'll be able to kind of, when I make these mappings from genes to memes, you'll be able to be like, this is not correct or whatever. So I think that I'm excited for your feedback there. I think that, but the idea is that genes kind of replicate into environmental niches, like, birds in the sky and fish in the sea. And I think that in sloths into their very chill environment. And then the question, and then memes also replicate, when I think about memetic environments, there are things like our brains, and there's like feeds, like Twitter feeds or books or stuff like that, that like then memes and ideas can then start to live in. And I think that, with the example of like the outrage, and like, outrage is the thing that spreads, but we don't see the story of the mutual aid or whatever. And so I think that, I guess when I think of environments, one of the things to note here is that, like, it's like, in the end, we kind of blame the replicator for the outcome, which is like, oh, look at what happened here. All these people are so outragey, and now we have MAGA or whatever, and then everybody's polarized, and the left hates the right. But I think that, in fact, it wasn't it wasn't MAGA's fault or whatever. It was like the fact that we have this place in our brains, a tendency towards group division and polarization and outrage, and that the internet just like let that go on full fire hose. And so I think one of the answers I think that the book claims is that what we need to do a better job of is like environmental design, or like the homes for memes to live in, and to like change the homes for memes. What do you or the environment for me. So it's kind of like, instead of a brutal environment, it's kind of creating a positive environment. Does that resonate, or what do you think about that?
I like it. For me, there's something about the mechanics and the metrics, which you could say are elements of the environment. And so, are you able to reach millions of people? Is that what the filter is? And so, if your memetics are little neighborhoods that are all interconnected and sometimes things spill over, it's going to have a different dynamic than you can now reach 2 million viewers if you're outraged enough. And then, well, what are people searching for? Like, what we drove the internet off of is advertising, which meant eyeballs, which meant finding the best ways. All the best money went to all the best ways to get eyeballs to look at the page. Right? And so what is the thing that we can put into the environment that's an antidote or an additional feedback mechanism that helps with that in the environment? So what metric would allow us to see, though that's damaging? It's like we can't see our own body to see that the collective body is taking damage at the right times in which we could respond to it.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I think that and what I'm hearing there is like, part of it is like, part of the environment is the like network design, and part of the environment is also the metrics and the goals. And so, this is obviously the shift from time spent to time well spent or whatever. And it's like, if we just slightly change some of these goals, then that's kind of part of the technology that emerges, and where the money flows and stuff is based off of, quote unquote, what we value. But what we value, it obviously gets like decoupled and turned into stuff just like eyeballs. What we value is eyeballs and consumerism. It's like, well, that's not exactly true. We do want everybody to have t-shirts and stuff, but like, and so I think, thinking about the ways in which there are these like nested, going from what we actually want to then like how those get metricized and then optimized for, that there's like, and that the thing that the memes end up like going into, like Facebook as a kind of, Facebook as a technology turned into, became optimized not for the thing over here of human values, but rather the thing that it could optimize for, which was the metric. Okay. Interesting. Cool.
I have something else that I want to offer you.
Yes. Yeah.
Somebody else has this breakdown, but I super love it, which is the hands, the head, and the heart. And so in the age of factory production, what companies wanted to control was people's hands. I didn't care what your head was doing. I didn't care what you loved. Just did your hands do the task? And so we had this whole phase of industrial production in which bodies and what bodies do mattered. And then we switched towards information, in which it's much more about what are you thinking? And then corporations went towards, how can I inspire you so that you're thinking about the company's problems while you're in the shower? Right? It's not while you're sitting at the desk. It's while you're on the bus, right? Like, I want mental engagement. And I think metamodernism is claiming it's also the emotional space, right? Now we're moving into the heart. And so and I'm going to mix up my people here and now point towards grief work and the Kubler-Ross model of like, oh, anger is just one of these phases of grief. And is the system going to then go, oh, we also need to go through denial, and we need to go through, what are the other ones? There's acceptance, depression, and the negotiation one. What's the word for the negotiation one? Bargaining.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so are we, with our memes, going through a bargaining phase? Are we starting to shift into that emotional awareness of, okay, I'm tired of being triggered. I'm now going to engage in memes that make fun of that and bargain my way to still be able to have this experience without having to be triggered into outrage.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So what I heard there is like, the hands, the head, and the heart model. And that's kind of like the production model, where it's like factories, hands, then now head, knowledge work, and then companies try to both do it 9 to 5, but also the like bonus time outside. And then and now we're kind of, as the head is being outsourced to AI or whatever, computation and other things, then it's like, okay, this heart piece. And I get what you're saying, I think, about the grief model, but how does the heart relate here? Are companies going to start exploiting our hearts, or like what's going on there?
Totally. They're already trying to exploit our hearts.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Are they creating an emotional experience, and do you tie that to your identity with the product? And so what you see now is lots more companies talking about what their identity is, what their social purpose is, rewriting their mission statements so that the younger generations will aspire to do that, because just making money is no longer attractive enough for people to want to work there.
Yeah, interesting. So yeah, I agree with that.
And that's all this work that's being done by networks, and networks are functioning in large part off of emotional interactions together.
Yeah. There's both like the, woke capitalism is like one side of that, and then the other side is like, the these emotional networks, whether it's Black Lives Matter or MAGA or Me Too or whatever, is like these like kind of new kind of network first things that are primarily based off like emotion and heart stuff in some ways. Do you think? But I guess, is there like a positive version? Because in theory, it's like, oh, we've gone from hands to head now to heart, and so yes, we do get something like woke capitalism. But it's like, is the quote unquote answer to this like that there's going to be something beyond heart, or is the answer to this that we just need to know that it's okay that these that there will be woke capitalism, but it's also cool to like check in with your own heart and like see where it's at or whatever?
We're having to do a ton of emotional development. We've got people who have been in denial for a long time and, trying to just stuff it. And so, of course, the first thing we get out of social media is outrage, because that's one of the first phases of grief work. And so once we become conscious, oh, we're collectively doing grief work individually and in groups. Oh, I don't need to be in that outrage stage anymore. The outrage stage is the anger stage, and I'm ready to be in a different stage. And so I'm looking for memetic exchanges that resonate with the phase that I'm in. So that's what I was trying to say about, I think there's a positive outcome here if we just see it as phases and emotional places that people are getting stuck in, instead of it's the necessary outcome.
Yeah, no, I like that. I think that's good. That's a great phrase for people in general. It's like, hey, your behavior, that specific behavior was bad, or but like this is just a part of like you're like growing or whatever. And I think, I guess getting to the bargaining, I guess a lot of people seem to be in the depression state in some ways, where they're like just like sad about the world and don't think anything positive is going to happen. And I guess like accepting the new status quo is where we want to get people to be, which is like, we're in this place all together where we have this networked hive mind on the interwebs, and like let's try to do it right. So I guess that's hopefully where we get to. Maybe as a final way, we're getting into fully wrap mode here, and I guess maybe my first question for you is in wrap mode is, do you have a place if folks want to kind of learn more or kind of take this path that is a more participatory, like there's very clear ways to do a kind of Y Combinator style hypergrowth startup. You like join YC, do whatever. How, if you were to recommend either readings or communities or networks or something, if folks want to take this more participatory path, how would they do that?
Well, the lightest thing that you can do is see the Thrivability sketch. And so that's way back on the SlideShare days. And it's 60 pages, pick any page, read a page, be inspired, by lots of different people talking about their perspective on Thrivability. So that's a very lightweight go explore. I, of course, have 2 books, Thrivability, Breaking Through to a World That Works, which, scans 20 some years of innovation to say, here are some things that are really interesting, pointing towards Thrivability. I have Cultivating Flows, which is a branch off that tree that talks about social organisms and how to build organizations. And my current project is Thrivable Society.org, where I'm asking questions. We just did a session on distributed governance. This month, we're going to start Thrivable U. This fall, we're doing one on group dynamics. So we take a topic and do an exploration together. Some people present content, but everybody's discussing that content and providing their own wisdom. with us. So those are places that I'm living, and you're also encouraged to invite me to other places, and then we can have conversations all over the place.
Great. That's great. I think that there's as a note on that, I think each of those, I'm looking at this Thrivability sketch. That's cool. That's just, it's like there's just like a lot of openness, resilience. There's a lot of kind of cool things to kind of explore there. And I think that the Thrivable Society thing is cool. Thrivablesociety.org. And it's like, if you want to be part of like a, peer-led co-community thing about exploring these questions, it seems like a great place to start. And I guess as a final note for our listeners, if you want to, or actually, Gene, before I say this, actually, while we're still on the shilling, not shilling, shilling is a negative. I can call it shilling for myself, but I don't want to call it shilling for others. If you want to check out Gene on Twitter, she has a great Twitter, and it's Nurture Girl. And so just that's the other place to find people, is just like finding these like
also
cool
have
Twitter
Thrivable, which I use as well. So Nurture Girl is full fire hose Gene Russell.
Nice.
Thrivable is a little bit more selective if you want the more professional version.
Nice. Okay, great. That's great. And I guess I ask maybe actually, no, I think I feel good. I think this has been a great, it's just, there's a lot of really cool little moves that I think I learned in this about how to kind of have a participatory stance. And so that was helpful for me to learn. So thank you so much for that. And just excited to see where both Thrivability goes. And then also these like, just trying to make these less brutal environments where participatory and cooperation thinking can be part of society. So thank you so much for coming, Gene, and thank you, listeners, for listening. Goodbye, everybody. Thanks so much for listening today. If you liked the show, please give us a 5-star podcast review or subscribe on YouTube. And if you'd like to chat about this episode with a community of amazing, smart, ambitious, divergent people, come on by and join our Discord. You can find it at roote.co. That's ROOTE.co. And then finally, if you'd like to contribute to these ideas being shared more widely in society, you can support the podcast production team at patreon.com/Rhys Lindmark. That's patreon.com/RHYSLINDMARK. Thanks, and see you here for the next episode. Bye.